You know, despite being kind of philosophically opposed to an Another Code remake in general, I still wanted Another Code Recollection to be good. I wanted this series to make a glorious return so that we could maybe see these great characters go on more adventures in the future. It disappoints me to no end that what we got is not even close to that. In my video about the original Another Codes, I think it was pretty clear that what I loved the most about these games was how they used the unique control schemes of their consoles to create really immersive gameplay and story experiences and incredibly innovative puzzles that sometimes really force you to think outside of the box. I said that it's physically impossible for the Switch to deliver the same experience as the originals, but that the remake could still have taken advantage of the Switch's unique control elements. Here's the thing though, while I would have loved if Another Code Recollection took advantage of the Switch to create some cool puzzles of its own and hoped that it would do that, I didn't expect it to. I was fully aware that the more likely scenario was that the game would just opt for more conventional puzzles with a more conventional control scheme. But this remake turned out to be worse than even that. It somehow managed to disappoint me in ways that I didn't expect it to. To explain those, I will talk about the remake of each game individually, because one of those is definitely worse than the other, and I think it's worth highlighting what one does better versus how the other screws up completely. So without further ado, let's look at how Another Code Recollection went about remaking Another Code 2 Memories. What I can say is that Recollection does make some changes that make sense given the jump to a different platform and perspective. Now that we're moving in completely 3D environments with an over-the-shoulder third-person perspective, of course the layout of the Edward Mansion and Blood Edward Island in general is going to change a bit. Honestly, I don't even know if the layout of the mansion in the original made too much sense architecture-wise, but due to the bird's eye perspective in that game, it was easy enough to suspend disbelief regarding that. Now that we get a lot more closer to everything, it's good that Recollection changed the layout a bit and added some verticality to it. I guess it was a little bit strange that in the first game we rarely used stairs to get anywhere. Similarly, even though I really loved some of the puzzles in the original, I also understand that they couldn't have stayed the same in the remake. But before we address the elephant in the room, let me just acknowledge that, judged completely by its own merits, the 2 Memories part of Another Code Recollection can have some pretty decent puzzle design here and there. I didn't keep count, but I think there might actually have been a few more puzzles in the remake that made me sit and think for a while or had me re-examine clues than they were in the original first game. One of my favorites has to be the door knocker one near the beginning of the game. It does give you a few more hints than I would have liked probably, but it still makes you pay close attention to the environment, has you figure out exactly what it wants you to do, and is aesthetically pretty appropriate. Glimmers of the original's genius also shines through a bit. The way you have to pull down and release the analog stick is probably a bit similar to how this door knocker mechanism would feel in real life, so you could say that this is a decent attempt at the immersive controls the originals had. Or at least that would be the case if it weren't for the big button prompts at the bottom of the screen. And this is where we get to the big problems with the puzzles in this game. Why does this have to be a thing? Were the controls really so hard for people to figure out on their own that we really needed these prompts to shatter the immersion that the originals were so good at keeping up? What is so bad about letting players experiment with their controller a bit instead of giving them these prompts or, even worse, big message boxes that already explain the entire puzzle? Use the candle flame to make the hidden writing on Franny's challenge appear. Use motion controls to move the paper by tilting the system or controller. Thank you, video game. Thank you for letting me know how exactly to solve this puzzle by controlling the fictional video game character Ashley Mizuki Robbins, who herself surely is just as aware of this message box as I am. The truly insulting part about this one is that the exact same puzzle was already in Another Code R. And lo and behold, somehow I was able to figure that one out without the game telling me exactly what to do there. It even had a neat thing where you couldn't put Ashley's hand above the heat source or she'd hurt herself. By the way, is that same puzzle still in the Another Code R part of this game, you might ask? No. More on that later. But this is only regarding puzzles that actually do have some pretty cool controls to them. There are also other ones. Press L to turn a valve. Golly gee, what a cool and unique way to control this. This is one of those things that disappoint me so much because I just keep thinking about how cool this could have been. No matter what configurations of Joy-Cons or Pro Controller you use, there could have been a fun way to implement motion controls here that would simulate actually turning a valve. But what we have here is something where the only thing that even comes close to being challenging is finding the thing in the first place. Once you've found it, there's nothing challenging your mind, nothing challenging your dexterity even, all it challenges is your ability to read and press the L button. At some points I was kind of disappointed when Ashley would just do things in cutscenes without any player input. The originals definitely would have let you do the things yourself in most cases. But in retrospect, if all that would have been was a button prompt telling me to press A or something, I guess I can't be too mad about that. One pretty condescending puzzle is when you have to combine two keys to form a new one. The original also had a puzzle like this, and while that one also wasn't too hard to figure out, at least the game didn't have a text box telling you that combining items is now unlocked. Seriously, if you're not gonna let me figure this out by myself anyway, why even have me go into the menu and press combine? Why not just do that for me as well at that point? The puzzles contributing to that immersive player-character connection? Gone. That game console turned puzzle box effect? Nowhere to be found. The thing that set Another Code apart from other games of the same genre is just mostly not here anymore. The last thing I want to address about the gameplay here is the question of if non-diegetic button prompts and tutorial boxes are always bad. The answer is no, of course not. It just depends on if the game has complex enough gameplay to necessitate unimmersive tutorials like that and on the game's general atmosphere. If a game tries to build a really gamey atmosphere, unimmersive tutorial stuff doesn't distract from a lot if it doesn't interrupt the gameplay flow too much. The problem is that Another Code doesn't, or at least shouldn't, try to build that kind of atmosphere. Even the remake is still a game that does try to come off as a bit more realistic and believable, although it unfortunately tends to undermine itself in that. Yeah, I didn't think this would be much of an issue, but Another Code Recollection does make some changes to its story, characters and dialogue, and some of those aren't great. The overall plot at least stays mostly the same. Some events are out of order from the original, but most of the story beats are still here in some form. And before I go into the problems I have with the writing here, I once again want to acknowledge something that I find isn't that bad of a change. That you now have to find 3 so-called Another keys is fairly effective in building up towards some kind of goal or endgame and does build some more suspense about what the mysterious Another could be. It does bring its own problems, like it makes everything feel a bit more video gamey that you have to find 3 keys to unlock the endgame, but I can live with this change. What I have more of an issue with is the characterization, which, if you remember, is something that I particularly praised about the first game. The way Ashley was written in the original was pretty believable for a 13-year-old. Not so much here. It starts with something that is new to the series, which is voice acting. Apparently in this world, 13-year-old girls sound more like 25-plus-year-old women.
I don't want to die. I'm still young.
And little boys and even littler girls also sound like 25-plus-year-old women. Huh.
Ashley, can you see me?
But honestly, I probably wouldn't even mind the voice acting so much if the dialogue was better. When I listen to Ashley talk here, I have to actively remember that she's supposed to be 13 with all the weird stuff she's saying sometimes. This is most prominent when she talks about splitting up with Jessica. In the original, this resulted out of Ashley and Jessica having a little fight about going to look for Richard. The text box shaking implies that Ashley is actually yelling, "I'm not being difficult." And in the end, Jessica wanders off with a pretty sad look on her face, because she probably knows that Ashley is kinda right. It is pretty rude of Richard to just not show up, and she feels bad for her niece being so disappointed. In Recollection, Ashley is just kinda mildly upset at Richard not showing up, so then Jessica goes with a smile on her face. No real fight between them. Then when she talks about this, Ashley says weird stuff like,
I was being a brat, so she probably wanted to get away from me.
No, actually, if anything you weren't enough of a brat to be honest.
I'm so sorry I let you go alone. It was selfish.
A conversation between an adult woman in her mid-30s and a 13-year-old girl, and the 13-year-old is the one who says, "I shouldn't have let you go alone." I don't know, she didn't say any of that in the original, and I find it to be such a baffling change to make here. If all it ends up doing is making the dialogue less believable, why have her say all these strange things? Another scene that disappointed me to no end is when Ashley finds out that her mother Sayoko, or I'm sorry, I guess it's Sayoko, is actually dead. This was one of the most emotional moments in the original. Ashley broke down crying here, and it's easy to see why. It's not just that she finds out her mother is dead, it's that finding out her father is still alive made her so hopeful about her mother as well. And then from one moment to the next, those hopes get crushed in an instant. Going from this much excitement to this much disappointment is emotional whiplash that I think even for adults would be hard to handle, let alone such a young girl. It's no surprise Dee has to talk her back into continuing. Here's how that plays out in Recollection.
Is something the matter, Ashley?
No. It's nothing.
Oh, okay. I thought that learning the person you were so hopeful about seeing is actually dead, or recalling a really traumatic event, or finding out that it might have been your father who killed her would be a bit more emotional, but I guess not. Moving on. The rest of the characters aren't too different from the original. Dee is almost the same as he was, and Richard... Aside from his new visual design, Richard doesn't stand out too negatively. Yet. I just want to quickly discuss one more character, which is Bill Edward, the main antagonist of the game. In the original, Richard speculates that Bill might have been in love with Sayoko, which makes a lot of sense. He might have killed Sayoko not just for her refusal to give him the another, but also in some sort of fit of jealousy. In his character graphics, Bill always has this empty look on his face, like he's now just a shell of the man he used to be, possibly because of the guilt he feels for killing the love of his life. His other evil deeds might just be the result of him having nothing else to live for, so he just doesn't even try to act like a good person anymore. Recollection very vaguely hints at the Bill loving Sayoko thing. Remember the Ashley being confronted with adult subject matters thing? Yep, that is also pretty much gone now. But yeah, most of the time he just comes off like an evil asshole now. Most of the deeper aspects of his character aren't really here anymore.
Richard! What have you done?
What the fuck, Richard?
It's disappointing, it's worse than the original, and I'm starting to repeat myself. Overall, even though I've been very negative here, the two memory section of this game is not outright terrible. If this was all there's to it, my bottom line would be that while Another Code Recollection doesn't do the original Another Code's justice, it still is an okay puzzle adventure game by its own merits. Not 50 to 60 euros worth of okay, but okay nonetheless. Unfortunately, this is not all there's to this game. Because even though I was fairly disappointed with the two memories part, I did not expect the remake of Another Code R to be this rough. I still can't believe that this part of the game turned out to be this bad. And it's the reason why I straight up cannot recommend anyone to buy this game, especially if you're a fan of the originals. The first Another Code wasn't done justice, while Another Code R got straight up butchered, as evident by this part's roughly 8 hours of playtime, almost only half of the original. Also keep in mind that you can read faster than you can listen to dialogue, so that is already the cut down content being stretched out to even be that long. Every aspect of the game suffers from this insane content cutting. The world and characters lack nuance and are way less believable, the plot outright doesn't make sense anymore a lot of the time. Oh god, the story is so bad. And the puzzles? What puzzles? Seriously, there are so many points in this game where all you do is just walk from one dialogue to the next with no actual gameplay in between. I brought up that invisible ink puzzle that was in the original Another Code R and got reused in a worse way in the remake of the first game. Well, in Another Code R, that puzzle was located in a photographer's house that had 3 puzzles in total, 4 if you count an optional one. One of those was even pretty clever, where you could use the DAS's camera to get a lighter picture of the dark room you were in. That house is still in Recollection, with the difference being that every single puzzle from the original has been cut, so you have nothing to actually do here anymore other than listening to dialogue. What's even more insulting about this is that a lot of the items you used for these cut puzzles are still in the game, you just can't do anything with them. It's almost like it's taunting you, like, hey, remember how cool this part used to be? The game already suffered from reducing the DS controls to simply button presses in the first game's remake, but here's where that really becomes a problem. Another Code R used to have some sort of little motion control puzzle minigame thing for most of the stuff Ashley did in that game, like even these recycle machines or the bubblegum machines. Yeah, it was pretty simple, but at least you could choose to do something here and there, it was stimulating. Now when there are stretches in the game where it's almost an hour of absolutely nothing to do other than walking from point A to point B and listening to dialogue, it becomes exhausting, especially when their dialogue just isn't good anymore. I don't know what the impression here was, but Another Code R wasn't just good because it had a good story, it was good because it had a good story that you actually got to experience through some really immersive gameplay. The puzzles that are here are also straight up worse, not only than the ones in the original Another Code R, but also than the ones in the two memories section in Recollection. While that part did have some decent brain teasers here and there, this one has most of them just boiled down to just do the thing that is written down somewhere. Put in a number that is just written down somewhere else and that isn't all that hard to find. Do I use the anti-rust spray or anti-bug spray to clean rust off a gear? The only puzzles that took me a bit longer to solve were the ones where I just didn't find some letters carved into something immediately. Some decisions here regarding puzzle design are also just so baffling to me. In the original, there were these ones where you had to use this water analysis kit to test water quality. They weren't hard to do, but I thought that wiggling around the Wiimote like a test tube was pretty fun, and there's this part where the kit becomes relevant later on and you have to remember to use it. In Recollection, it's this function that gets added to the DAS and you have to line up two 3D models. How often do you have to do that? Once. A whole new function gets added to this thing and we use it one single time in this entire game. Why even include it then at that point? To pretend that these long stretches of non-interactivity don't exist? Some of my favorite puzzles from Another Code R were these TAS door puzzles. The RAS, as it's called now, does something similar, but of course it's much worse too. The cool thing about the ones in the original was that they all used the same concept, but added some twist to it each time to throw you off a bit and to make you think about the puzzle and the controller in your hands in different ways. How does Recollection do these puzzles? They're randomly generated. Can't have bad puzzle design if the puzzles aren't designed, am I right, fellas? You know, I didn't even know this, but recently I learned that the Switch Joy-Cons actually have an infrared camera in them, this little smooth black part here. That would have been perfect to use for Another Code game, right? No? Okay, guess not. Oh yeah, you also really start to appreciate the DS touchscreen or Wii cursor the umpteenth time Ashley just doesn't want to interact with something even though you're standing directly in front of it and she instead interacts with something completely different. There is a point to be made here that not being able to explore everything from every single angle was actually kind of beneficial in the original. Unfortunately, I have now run out of things to say about the gameplay, which means that I have to address the story. The story of the Another Code R remake in Recollection is so fucking bad that I genuinely could not believe it as I was playing. And somehow it's not just because of all the cut content. The game also makes changes to the story that, at best, are seemingly just there for little to no reason and at worst actively just make it make less sense. The original Another Code R story was really nice. It was a touching tale about loss, individuals and families dealing with that loss, and the importance of remembering loved ones that are no longer with us. For Ashley in particular, it was cool to see her, through memories, reconnect with her lost mother and lend someone the emotional support she herself so desperately needed during her adventure in the first game. Showed some real growth in this already great character. It was also great seeing her relationship with Richard evolve. In Another Code 1 they reconnected in that they physically met each other again, but there was still some emotional baggage they needed resolving, which I would say was done pretty superbly in the sequel. The fact that their relationship wasn't perfect and had some issues also added to the realistic, grounded feeling of it all. And none of this has been properly adapted into the remake. There's either way too much stuff rushed through or outright skipped for things to believably develop, and the nonsensical changes here turn what was once heartfelt and genuine into something so tacky that is just unbelievable to me. I said before that in the Another Code 1 remake, Richard didn't stick out too negatively yet, which implies that he does here. And the game really wastes no time in making that abundantly evident. In my original video, I kinda just made a side comment about him, calling him a genius without social skills, but in retrospect that might have even been a bit unfair. After all, he did spend over a decade almost completely alone on an island. So it's no wonder that his social skills have deteriorated over time and he doesn't know things like most teenagers in 2007 having cell phones, therefore not letting Ashley have one. Her "what decade are you living in" is a pretty appropriate question here. Maybe his time in isolation made him think in a way that led him believe Ashley would have been more upset about not having the barbecue ready than not picking her up at the bus stop. Here's where Recollection made a change that really does nothing other than having the story make less sense, because this Richard doesn't have an excuse anymore. The fact that for some reason he invited all of his colleagues to the barbecue means that someone else could have taken care of what he was doing, so the only reason he didn't pick up Ashley here is just him being an idiot. Also, none of them could have said, "Hey Richard, didn't you want to pick up your daughter?" Then it gets even more baffling when Ashley goes to get charcoal. Richard goes back to the lab to take care of something, even though here, unlike the original, it seems like anyone else of these people could have done that. Mike, who for some reason is called Ian now, even says,
I offered to go instead, since you're here and all, but he said it had to be him.
Seriously?
like, what? Did you or did you not want to go camping with your daughter? This Richard doesn't come off as someone whose years of isolation made him worse at social situations, but more like someone who has part of his brain missing. Also in Recollection, Ashley just has a cell phone. Like, they had to go out of their way to change this, and all it does is make the story worse, nothing else. She never even uses it. Their fight, if you can still call it that, is also a good example of no voice acting being better than underwhelming voice acting.
I have interests that are just as important to me as your research is to you.
Why not actually have Ashley yell at Richard, show that there's some real tension between them? And then the changes to the endgame are so batshit insane that I don't even know why Richard is even a character here anymore. What Ashley and Richard ended up bonding over was their remembrance of Sayoko and them finally getting closure regarding her death. But between temporarily bringing her back inside Ashley's mind, which to me undermines her entire character, and turning the game's antagonist into a weird Kingdom Hearts creature, it all distracts from the actual important stuff so much that I don't even know why anyone even bothered pretending this is a remake of a story when it all just comes off as some shitty fanfic. But even all of that doesn't even come close to how hard this game botched the story of Matthew Crusoe. It's the one that suffers the most from the content being cut down so much, as it misses many of the real bonding moments Ashley and Matt had in the original game, to the point that I can't even buy that they're really friends by the end. They used to have things like, instead of calling each other Ashley and Matthew, they said Ash and Matt. They called each other out on Ashley's flashbacks and Matt's running away, and talked about things like what they wanted to do with their lives. All of that is gone now, and it's so weird what was prioritized over that. The side characters in the original were pretty good. They fleshed out the world some more, made it so that Ashley and her problems didn't seem like the center of the universe, but were also great for Ashley to bounce off of. But they weren't so important that they should just replace vital moments between Ashley and Matt, especially when the side characters are so poorly done now. Tommy and Janet are so bland now, and it's kinda hard to explain, but they just give off that certain indie game vibe, I guess. You know, they always have to be quipping, but also always have to come off as way too nice at the same time. Let's just say the original never had me do this when talking to them.
Hey, I just friend with you. See?
So, you know, it's really cool that we have to skip some stuff like the section where Matt gets sick. That one had more bonding between Matt and Ashley, had you get familiar with a far more interesting character, and had some pretty cool puzzles along the way. Instead, we can now listen to more dialogue between these awful characters and then don't even get the revelation we had in the original. So what was even the point? I also hate how Ashley talks about her music to them now. She used to be so passionate about it, but now she's so intimidated and it's just lame. Coming back to Matt though, it would have been bad enough if the game just rushing through the story of the second most important character was all of it. But of course, this story also wasn't free of terrible changes that, again, don't do anything other than make everything worse. Honestly, did we really have to get spoiled the big twist about Matt's sister? What in the world could even be the point in doing that? The whole thing was so emotional in the original, but here it left me feeling nothing because it was so poorly set up, and it removes one of the most important reasons for why Matt in this scene feels the way he does. Maybe if the game spent some actual time having you bond with this character and didn't spoil the conclusion to his story, this could have had some impact, but this is just a joke. And then there's the moment that broke me. Any amount of hope I somehow still had left for this game was shattered here. In my video about the original and other codes, I praised the fact that there were some secrets in R that don't get uncovered by the end, and the whereabouts of Matt's father was what I was talking about. I thought it was a pretty bold choice to have one of the main mysteries of the story left unsolved by the end. When I think about how good the tone of those original games is, this is one of the first things I think about. Ashley is no super detective who can find out every truth, and being confronted with the bittersweet realities of ordinary life was refreshing to see in a video game. In the remake, Greg Davis, who got turned into basically a Pokemon character here, not only straight up tells you where Matt's dad is, but also in that same conversation gets a phone call where he learns that the dad just so happened to have woken up from his coma a few moments ago. This is proof to me that, whether it was due to lack of resources or care, the Another Code R remake was rushed. I still can't believe this is real. When Greg takes Matt with him, I feel like I'm watching this boy getting kidnapped. How could the second main character of this story just be written out like this? It's insane. Did nobody notice that it's kinda strange that when Ashley goes around the lake to say goodbye to the other characters, the second most important character in the game is not one of them? There's other issues, like I think the dialogue here is even worse.
This is our first time on a boat together, huh?
I suppose it is.
What? But if I really listed everything wrong with this story, I feel like this video would never get done.
Another is the fruit of Sayoko's research, and you would reduce it to a cash grab?
Okay, maybe I wouldn't go that far. Looking at some things like the first remake's art direction, for example, to me it really seems like at least some care was put into the development of this game. I don't know what happened here, and honestly, I don't want to speculate on that because at the end of the day I truly don't know. All I can do is judge the work in front of me, and that happens to be one of the most frustratingly disappointing games I've played in a while. I don't even think I want sequels in the series anymore if they're based on this remake. These are just not the same characters, and this is just not the direction I would want the series to take. At first I thought I would include a funny rant about how Kyle Hyde got basically Thanos snapped out of this fictional universe, but maybe it's good that we're likely not getting a Hotel Dusk remake that doesn't adapt anything about what made that game so good. Regarding Another Code Recollection, I just can't recommend wasting your time and money on this. I told a friend about the R remake being so much shorter, and he said something like, shouldn't a remake add stuff if anything, not take stuff away? And yeah, that alone would be enough reason not to buy such a fairly expensive game, wouldn't it? What we have here is a remake that, at best, improves on the originals in terms of graphics, and even that is debatable. In pretty much every other aspect, it is straight up worse. I'm not fond of the recent game remake trend in general, but Another Code Recollection has to be one of the most pointless ones so far. Please just follow my advice from the last video and play the originals. I truly think they're underrated gems and deserve to be talked about way more than they are right now. As for me, I think I'm just gonna go back to playing good Access games.